It sat in the velvet box like a sleeping star, quiet but commanding, glowing with a light that had never dimmed despite the decades that had passed. The antique ring was more than gold and gem. It was the story of my life, the vessel of my husband's love, and the keeper of our family's history. Whenever I opened that little box, I felt his presence again, as though his hand reached across time to steady mine. I remember the night he gave it to me. The world outside was dark and uncertain, but his eyes were steady, and his voice carried the weight of promises that would never be broken. "This ring," he whispered, slipping it onto my trembling finger, "is not just for you. It is for the love we build, the children we raise, and the generations that come after us. It is proof that what we share will outlast even us." And it had, through sleepless nights cradling infants, through birthdays and graduations, through quarrels that tested us and reconciliations that bound us closer. The ring never left my hand. It gleamed when I needed bread dough, when I clapped for our son's school performance, when I waved goodbye as he marched off into his adult life. Each scratch on its band told a story, each tiny imperfection carried memory. When my husband passed, it became the one piece of him I could touch. I'd sit by the window in the quiet evenings, turning it gently in my palm, feeling his warmth where there was only absence. It was not an ornament, it was a lifeline. People often say that possessions are just things. They are wrong. Some things carry souls within them. This ring carried his. It carried mine too. From the very beginning, I knew it would never go to just anyone. My husband and I had agreed it would belong to the child or grandchild who proved themselves not merely by birthright, but by heart. Someone who cherished family above convenience, loyalty above greed. Someone who understood sacrifice, the way he had worked endless hours to provide, the way I had set aside my dreams so our children could chase theirs. This ring was not to reward entitlement. It was to honor love. That belief carried me through the years as I watched our children grow. I told them stories of the ring, of their father's laughter, of the way he would slip it from my finger and kiss it after an argument, as if to seal forgiveness inside the circle of gold. I told them of our courtship, the hunger of youth, the way we built a life from scraps and determination. I hoped they would see the ring not as a treasure to own, but as a legacy to protect. Our eldest son seemed, for a time, to understand. As a boy, he would ask to hear the story of the ring again and again, his eyes wide with wonder. He would trace the pattern with his small finger and say, "Mama, when I grow up, I'll take care of it just like Papa took care of you." I believed him then. I believed him with all the trust only a mother can give her child. But time has a way of revealing who we truly are. As years passed, the boy who once held the ring with reverence grew into a man who looked at it differently. Where I saw memory, he saw value. Where I felt devotion, he calculated worth. The warmth that once glowed in his eyes was replaced by a hunger I could not recognize, a hunger that made my heart ache. Still, I clung to hope. A mother always does, even when signs appear. Even when disappointments pile high, the heart insists that one day, the child will remember the stories told at the hearth, the lessons etched in sacrifice. And so I kept the ring safe, waiting, watching, praying. I imagined passing it down in a moment of tenderness, perhaps to him, if he proved worthy, or perhaps to a grandchild who might carry gentler blood. I imagined sitting in the parlor, the family gathered, and placing the ring in new hands with words of wisdom. I imagined it shining under tearful eyes, binding the past to the future in a circle unbroken. That dream sustained me. It gave me patience. It gave me purpose. But dreams can fracture in a single heartbeat. It happened on an ordinary afternoon, the kind of day when the world feels soft and safe. The kettle had just begun to sing on the stove, and I was setting the table with teacups when my son walked in. He carried himself with the confidence of a man who expected the world to bow. There was no hesitation in his stride, no warmth in his greeting. He glanced at the table, at the tidy home I had kept for decades, and then his eyes fell on the velvet box resting by the window. He didn't smile, he didn't ask, he simply said, as if it were already decided, "That ring belongs to my wife now." The words struck like a slap, sharper than any blow. For a moment, I could not breathe. My mind raced back through every memory, the promises, the sacrifices, the quiet nights of longing, and collided with the cold arrogance of his claim. That was when I realized the son I once knew had been swallowed by entitlement, and the heirloom I had cherished was no longer safe in his hands. And just like that, the warmth of memory turned to the chill of betrayal. His words echoed in the air, sharp and unrelenting, as though they had been rehearsed and delivered with cruel precision. "That ring belongs to my wife now." He didn't ask. He didn't soften. He spoke it like a decree, a command issued by someone who believed ownership flowed not from love, but from entitlement. For a heartbeat, silence pressed down on me. My breath caught. My hands trembled on the edge of the table. The kettle whistled in the background, shrill and piercing, as though it too felt the offense. I looked at him, my son, my flesh, my blood, and I searched for the boy who once promised to take care of this very ring. But all I saw was a man with hardened eyes, eyes that no longer looked at me with affection but with calculation. "Your wife?" I asked, my voice low, almost breaking. "This ring is not some trinket to be handed over like a gift from a store. It is our family's heart. It is—" He cut me off with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Mother, don't be dramatic. It's just a ring. You've had it long enough. My wife should wear it now. It will look better on her finger than gathering dust in your box." His words sliced deeper than he realized. Just a ring. How easily he erased decades of meaning, the countless memories pressed into the gold, the sacrifices it represented. To him, it was a possession, an accessory to flaunt, a prize to place on his wife's hand so she could parade it before her friends. Before I could respond, she appeared. My daughter-in-law glided into the room with her perfected smile, the kind that never reached her eyes. She stood behind him, her hand resting possessively on his arm as though staking her claim over both him and the heirloom. She tilted her chin and looked at me with smug satisfaction. "Yes," she said sweetly, though her tone carried poison beneath the sugar. "It's only right. We're the next generation. I should have it. After all, it's tradition for the wife to wear the family ring, isn't it?" Her words burned. Tradition? She knew nothing of tradition, nothing of the tears and love that had forged this legacy. She hadn't sat at my kitchen table learning how to stretch a meal to feed growing children. She hadn't stood beside me in hospital corridors when my husband fought for breath. She hadn't endured nights of worry, counting coins to pay school fees, or mended torn clothes by candlelight. She had not earned one thread of the story that ring carried. I opened my mouth, but my son's voice boomed over mine. "Don't make this difficult, Mother. It's time to pass it on. Stop clinging to the past." The audacity of his words struck me harder than the demand itself. Stop clinging to the past. Did he not realize that the past was the foundation of everything he stood upon, that without the sacrifices we made, without the sweat of his father's brow and the sleepless nights of his mother's care, he would not stand so tall today? But to him, the past was irrelevant. All that mattered was possession, control, and appearances. He did not see me as a mother, a woman who had poured her soul into raising him. No, he saw me as an obstacle, the gatekeeper of the treasures he believed were his by right. The humiliation tightened in my chest. I saw the smugness in her smile, the eagerness in his eyes. And for the first time in my life, I felt like a stranger in my own family. They were united not by love, but by greed. I tried to speak with reason, with calm, though my heart pounded like a drum of betrayal. "This ring," I said, steadying my voice, "is not yours to claim. It will go to the one who shows they truly understand its worth not in money, but in love." He laughed. My own son laughed in my face. "Worth, Mother? Do you even know what it's worth? It could pay for a house, or more, and yet you let it sit in a box as though it were worthless. My wife deserves it now. She's my family. Don't you want her to feel welcome?" Welcome. The word twisted bitterly in my mouth. Had I not welcomed her? Had I not cooked for her, offered her my home, opened my arms despite the coolness in hers? And yet, here she stood, eyes glittering with triumph, relishing my pain as if it were her reward. Something inside me cracked, not loudly, not visibly, but silently, like glass splintering under pressure. I realized then that my son no longer saw me as his mother. He saw me as a vault, one he was determined to break open. His loyalty had shifted, his promises had vanished. He stood on the side of greed, and he expected me to step aside and let it consume me. But I would not. Still, I sat there, shaken, the weight of his words pressing on me. How had it come to this? How had the boy who once kissed my hand become the man who demanded my soul's keepsake for his wife's finger? Where had I gone wrong? The questions gnawed at me as I watched them, hand in hand, smirking as though victory were already theirs. My chest ached with the betrayal, but beneath that ache, something colder stirred. A steeliness I hadn't felt in years began to rise. I did not answer them then. Instead, I turned away, silent, letting them believe they had won the argument. But inside me, the storm was only beginning. Long after they left that afternoon, their words lingered in the quiet house, echoing off the walls like ghosts. I sat by the window with the ring in my lap, staring at its glow, trying to understand how the child I once knew had turned into a man I could barely recognize. He had not become entitled overnight. No, the change had crept in slowly, like shadows lengthening at dusk, until one day, I realized the light was gone. I remembered the boy he used to be, the one who ran barefoot through the yard, hair sticking to his forehead, cheeks flushed with joy. He would bring me wildflowers clutched in his small hands, dirt still clinging to the roots, and beam when I placed them in a glass of water. He once told me, "Mama, you and Papa are the richest people in the world because you have love." I believed him. I believed he would grow into a man who treasured people above possessions. But somewhere along the way, his gaze shifted. The first cracks appeared in his teenage years. He began to compare himself with others' classmates, who had newer shoes, shinier bicycles, better gadgets. "Why can't we have what they have?" he asked one evening, slamming his school bag down. I explained gently that his father and I worked hard to provide what mattered most: a safe home, an education, and love. But he scoffed, saying, "Love doesn't buy cars." At the time, I brushed it off as youthful rebellion, believing maturity would wash away the greed, but instead, it deepened. I recalled his college years, when we scrimped and saved to send him away, cutting corners at home so he could pursue his dreams. We sent him care packages, homemade biscuits, sweaters knitted with tired hands, notes written late at night. At first, he thanked us. Then, gradually, his gratitude faded. He started calling only when he needed money, his tone clipped and impatient. When I once asked about the sweater, he laughed. "Mother, no one wears things like that anymore. Don't embarrass me." Embarrass him. That word had stung more than I let him know. And then there was the first holiday he returned with her, the woman who would become his wife. She was polished, elegant, and utterly unimpressed by the warmth of our home. She walked through my kitchen as if it were a relic from another century, commenting on how small the house was, how quaint my dishes looked. My son, instead of defending me, laughed along with her. It was the first time I felt erased in my own home. I noticed how he began mirroring her values, speaking of success only in terms of possessions. "We'll buy a bigger house than this," he said one evening, looking around the living room with thinly veiled disdain. "Something modern, something worthy." I laughed lightly, hoping he was joking. But his eyes were serious. The small betrayals piled one upon another. He missed family gatherings, claiming work, though I later saw pictures of him vacationing abroad. He dismissed his siblings' achievements, saying they were small-minded compared to his ambitions. He scoffed at tradition, at faith, at every root that had once grounded him. And always, she was there, whispering in his ear, her approval tied to how much he could provide, how high he could climb. I do not blame her entirely. My son made his choices, but I cannot forget the way she smirked whenever he sided with her over me, as though each cut was a victory. I remembered one particular evening, a winter dinner, when I served stew in the old ceramic bowls that had been my mother's. He tasted it and said flatly, "Don't you think it's time you upgraded? Everything here looks worn." I stared at him, the spoon frozen halfway to my mouth. Those bowls had survived wars, migrations, and heartbreaks. To me, they were beautiful. To him, they were shabby. That was the moment I realized he no longer saw meaning in what endured, only in what sparkled new. And yet, foolishly, I kept hoping. I told myself he was stressed, that marriage and work had hardened him, but that deep down, the boy who once brought me wildflowers was still there. I excused every slight, every dismissal, every careless word. I convinced myself that if I remained patient, if I kept showing love, he would remember who he was. But the demand for the ring proved otherwise. It wasn't just about the gold on my finger. It was about everything he had come to believe, that love was disposable, sacrifice invisible, and legacy nothing more than wealth to be seized. The ring was the culmination of all those small betrayals, the final proof that greed had fully consumed him. As I turned the ring in my palm, my chest ached with a sorrow that words could not carry. I had lost my husband years ago, and now I realized I had lost my son too, not to death, but to pride, to arrogance, to a hunger that would never be satisfied. Yet, beneath the sorrow, something stirred. It was faint at first, like the first spark of fire in damp wood, but it grew as I thought of the stories my husband had told me, of the promise we had made. The ring must go only to the one who understood its true worth. My son had shown me, beyond doubt, that he was not that person. For years, I had swallowed pain in silence, telling myself it was a mother's duty to endure. But now, as I sat in that quiet house with memories pressing in on me, I realized silence had done him no favors. Silence had only fed his entitlement. This time would be different. This time, I would not surrender what mattered most, not to greed, not to arrogance, not even to my own child. I lifted the ring and slid it back onto my finger, the gold warm against my skin. My reflection in the window looked older, lined with grief, but there was strength in my eyes, strength I had nearly forgotten. I whispered into the empty room, as though my husband could still hear me. No more tears, no more silence. He may be lost, but I will not lose myself. That night, the house was unbearably still. The laughter of my son and his wife, the arrogance in their words, seemed to linger in the air like smoke that refused to dissipate. I sat in my chair long after the lamps were extinguished, the ring gleaming faintly in the moonlight, and I let the silence press against me. For years, I had filled these silences with tears, but this time, my eyes remained dry. I would not cry for what was already gone. My son had chosen his path. My grief for him was real, but grief would not protect the legacy his father and I had built with so much labor and love. I had given enough tears. Now, I needed resolve. I rose slowly and crossed the hall to the small wooden chest I had kept locked for decades. Its key hung on a chain around my neck, resting close to my heart, as though guarding not only objects, but pieces of my very soul. With trembling fingers, I unlocked it and lifted the lid. Inside lay the bundle of letters my husband had written to me during our marriage, the ones he left behind, knowing one day I would need his voice to guide me when he no longer could. The paper was yellowed, the ink faded in places, but the moment I unfolded the first letter, his voice rose vividly in my mind. "My love," it began, "if you are reading this, then perhaps the days have grown heavy. Remember always that what we built was not meant to be squandered. It was meant to be cherished, protected, and passed forward with pride. Never doubt your strength. You have carried this family farther than I ever could alone." I pressed the letter to my lips, feeling the ache of longing but also the stirrings of courage. He had believed in me then. He believed in me still. His words were not written to a fragile woman but to a partner, a matriarch, someone capable of carrying the weight of legacy with dignity. Letter after letter, I read until dawn. He wrote of the nights he worked late at the factory, not for money alone but for the dream of giving our children more. He wrote of the sacrifices we made, the dinners skipped, the holidays spent in modest ways, because true wealth was not measured in gold but in the values we instilled. He warned, even then, that temptation could change hearts, that sometimes love would be tested by greed. If the day comes when our legacy is threatened, one line said, do not surrender it to unworthy hands. Stand firm, for our story deserves better. By the time the morning light filtered through the curtains, I no longer felt the hollow ache of helplessness. I felt something steadier, something fierce, though quiet. My tears had dried, leaving behind the steel of conviction. I folded the letters carefully, returned them to the chest, and locked it again. My husband's words had become my shield. I would not lash out in anger, as tempting as it was to storm to my son's home and demand he show me respect. No anger would only feed their narrative that I was stubborn, dramatic, clinging to the past. If I wanted to protect this ring, if I wanted to defend the story it carried, I would need wisdom, not weakness. So I began to think, what was the true worth of the ring? Not the sentimental value I knew that well, but its standing in the world beyond our home. My son spoke of its financial value as though it were an undeniable truth. Yet he had never taken the time to truly know what it was. If I was to make a choice, I needed knowledge, and knowledge had always been my greatest weapon. I sat by the table, sipping tea from a cracked cup, and began to plan. I would have the ring appraised, not in secret shame but with deliberate care. If it was truly valuable, then I would use that fact not to flaunt, but to secure its place beyond greedy hands. And if it was not as precious in money as he believed, then I would still hold the stronger truth that it was priceless in history and in heart. The thought of facing him again brought a twist of pain, but I felt no fear. I had spent too many years giving in, too many years letting my love for him silence my instincts. Not this time. His arrogance had unlocked something in me. I had long forgotten mother's will, a widow's determination, a woman's strength. I looked at the ring again, turning it in the light. How many times had I kissed this gold, prayed over it, clutched it in sleepless hours. How many times had I felt my husband's love in its circle of promise? It deserved more than to be paraded on the hand of a woman who saw only glitter. It deserved protection. I thought of my grandchildren, still young, still malleable. Perhaps one day they would understand the true meaning of heritage. Perhaps one day the ring could inspire rather than corrupt. But until then, it must be safeguarded, preserved not as a bauble but as a beacon. I whispered into the morning air, as though my husband still stood beside me. I will not let it be stolen. I will not let our story be diminished. The kettle began to whistle again, sharp and insistent, and I rose to pour another cup. My body was tired, but my spirit felt newly awake. For the first time in years, I felt clarity. No more tears, no more pleading, only resolve. I dressed carefully that morning, slipping the ring firmly onto my finger, as though reclaiming it from the shadow of my son's greed. Then I placed the letters back into their chest and tucked the key beneath my blouse. It was time to step beyond sorrow, beyond humiliation, into action. The first step was simple, but crucial. I needed to know exactly what I held in my hand, not in sentiment, but in fact. The world outside might measure worth in dollars, in history, in rarity, and I would face it on those terms as well. I gathered my shawl, locked the door behind me, and set out with a new steadiness in my stride. The ring was no longer just a memory, it was a mission. The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of autumn leaves as I stepped into town. The ring glimmered faintly on my hand, a secret burning brighter than any jewel displayed in a shop window. My son's words still echoed in my mind, his arrogance, his dismissal, his certainty that the ring was already his wife's. But today, I was not the grieving mother or the dismissed widow. Today, I was a woman on a mission. The appraiser's shop sat tucked between a row of antique bookstores and cafes, its windows crowded with clocks, cameos, and tarnished silver. A bell chimed softly when I opened the door, and the air inside smelled faintly of polish and age. Behind a glass counter stood a man in his 60s, spectacles perched on his nose, his eyes sharp with the kind of patience that comes from handling things older than himself. "Good morning," he greeted warmly, though his voice carried the practiced reserve of someone who had seen many hopeful faces walk through his door. "How may I help you today?" I hesitated, my fingers brushing against the velvet box hidden inside my purse. The weight of it was almost unbearably years of memory, love, sacrifice, all compressed into that single piece of jewelry. Slowly, carefully, I drew it out and set it on the counter. "I'd like you to tell me," I said softly, "what this is worth." The man adjusted his spectacles and opened the box. The moment the ring caught the light, his eyes widened just slightly. Not much. He was a professional, after all, but enough for me to notice. He reached for a loupe, brought the ring closer, and began to examine it with quiet concentration. I stood there, heart pounding, watching as he tilted it under the lamp, traced the engraving, studied the setting of the stone. Each second felt like an eternity. "This," he murmured finally, almost to himself, "is extraordinary." My breath caught. "Extraordinary." He looked up, his face more animated now. "Where did you say you got this?" "It belonged to my husband," I replied. "He gave it to me many years ago. It was in his family before that." He nodded, as though the explanation made perfect sense. "I thought as much. The craftsmanship is remarkable at 19th century, perhaps earlier. The filigree work alone is almost impossible to replicate today. And this stone dew, you see how it glows, even in low light. That's no ordinary diamond. It's a Golconda, from the mines of India. Incredibly rare." His words washed over me like a revelation. Golconda. Rare. Extraordinary. I had always known the ring was precious, but to hear it spoken of in such reverent terms by an expert filled me with both awe and vindication. He continued, now with growing excitement, "There are very few pieces like this left in the world. The historical significance alone makes it invaluable. It may have once belonged to nobility, perhaps even royalty. The provenance, if you can trace it, could increase its value exponentially." I swallowed hard. The room suddenly too small for the enormity of what he was saying. "And, financially, what would something like this be worth?" He paused, set the ring gently back into its box, and looked me in the eye. "Madame, conservatively, this could fetch upwards of $200,000 at auction, possibly more, depending on documentation." The words struck me like thunder. 200,000. I clutched the edge of the counter, steadying myself. All those years I had worn it, kneading bread, rocking babies, sweeping floors, never once thinking of it in terms of wealth. To me, it had been priceless in memory alone. But now I knew it was priceless in the world's eyes too. Images flashed through my mind. My son's smug expression, his wife's greedy smile, their laughter at my expense. They thought they were claiming a trinket, a mere family jewel, but in truth, they were grasping at a piece of history, a treasure worth more than they could possibly imagine, and suddenly, I felt the scales tip. For years, I had felt powerless against their arrogance, dismissed as irrelevant, treated like a relic myself. But here, in this small, dusty shop, I realized I held the greatest power of all: knowledge, truth, leverage. I closed the box gently, my hands no longer trembling. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice steadier than I felt. The appraiser gave me a kind smile. "This ring is more than valuable, it is a legacy. Guard it well. Not everything should be sold, even when it's worth a fortune. Some things carry more than money within them." His words struck a deep chord. Guard it well. My husband had trusted me to do just that, and now I knew I would. As I left the shop, the autumn air felt different, crisper, sharper, as though the world itself had shifted. I walked with a straighter back, the velvet box clutched firmly in my hand. For so long, my son had spoken over me, dismissed me, belittled the very things I held dear. But now, I had proof that my love, my memories, my sacrifices had been bound up in something the world recognized as extraordinary. It wasn't just a ring, it was heritage, it was history, it was power, and it was mine to decide what would become of it. I thought of my son's words, again, "It belongs to my wife now." How small they sounded compared to the truth I now carried. He believed himself entitled to a trinket, when in reality, he had tried to steal a treasure that could never be his. I slipped the box back into my purse, my fingers brushing over it with reverence. For the first time in years, I did not feel weak in the face of his demands. I felt steady, purposeful, prepared. As I walked home, a plan began to take shape, its outlines forming with each step. I would not argue with him. I would not beg for respect that he refused to give. Instead, I would act with quiet wisdom, the kind my husband had always admired. If my son wished to reduce me to a gatekeeper of possessions, then so be it. But he would learn, in time, that this gate could not be forced open by arrogance or greed. The ring would not be his wife's. Not now. Not ever. And with that knowledge burning inside me, I smiled for the first time in days. The battle ahead no longer frightened me. For once, I was not on the defensive. I was holding the winning card. It began with whispers, soft as autumn breezes through brittle leaves. At first, only the appraiser knew the truth about the ring, but secrets, especially those wrapped in rarity and legacy, have a way of slipping into the world. Within a week, I noticed the first ripple. At the market, Mrs. Whitfield leaned closer over her basket of apples, her eyes bright with curiosity. "I heard," she murmured, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial hush, "that your husband's ring is no ordinary jewel. Is it true? They say it's worth more than a house?" I smiled faintly, neither confirming nor denying, though my silence only seemed to fuel her excitement. By the time I reached the bakery, 2 more neighbors had mentioned I teach with AW, each with admiration that shimmered beneath their questions. The whispers were spreading faster than fallen leaves on the wind. At first, I felt exposed, uncertain whether to shrink from their interest or accept it. Yet, as the days passed, I noticed something remarkable. The tone in their voices was not envy but respect. Friends who had once seen me as little more than a lonely widow now looked at me with reverence. They praised my wisdom for holding on to the heirloom, for honoring its history rather than cashing it in. "You're preserving something rare," said an old church friend, patting my arm. "Not just for yourself, but for the community. It's a legacy we can all be proud of." Those words warmed me deeply. For years, I had been made to feel small within my own family, dismissed by my son as though my only worth lay in what I could hand over. Yet here, among neighbors and friends, I was valued not for what I could give away, but for what I had chosen to protect. But not everyone admired quietly. The whispers that carried respect to my ears also carried resentment to another's, my son. It was one afternoon, while I was pruning the last of the roses in the garden, when he arrived unannounced. His car door slammed with a force that made the birds scatter, and he strode toward me, his face flushed with a fury I had not seen since his boyhood tantrums. "Mother," he barked, not bothering with greetings, "what exactly have you been telling people?" I straightened slowly, setting the shears aside, brushing dirt from my gloves. "I've told no one anything." "Michael, why do you ask?" His jaw clenched. Don't play coy with me. Everyone in town is talking about the ring, about its value, its history. Do you have any idea how this makes me look? I held his gaze, unflinching. Perhaps they're simply proud of their community. After all, it is part of our family's story. Our family, he snapped. It's my inheritance. And now the whole town thinks you're some kind of guardian angel sitting on a pile of treasure while we're made to wait like beggars at your table. There it was again, that entitlement, sharp and bitter on his tongue. He didn't see me as his mother, only as an obstacle between him and what he wanted. I drew in a steadying breath. Michael, this ring is not about you, nor about appearances. It carries your father's memory, his sacrifice, and our history. If people speak of it, it is because they see its worth. His wife's voice cut in then, for she had trailed behind him, her heels crunching on the gravel. Worth that you're hoarding, she said smoothly, her lips curling into a smug smile. It's shameful, really, to have something so valuable and refuse to share it with your family. The word share stung like acid. They didn't want to share, they wanted to take. Enough, I said, though my tone was calm. This discussion will not be held in my garden like some street quarrel. If you wish to speak civilly, come inside. If not, I have roses to finish. The tension in the air was thick as storm clouds, but they followed me nonetheless. Inside, the conversation spiraled, his demands growing louder, her insinuations sharper. Do you understand how humiliating this is for me? Michael thundered. People keep congratulating me, as though the ring were already mine, yet you sit there, flaunting your power, refusing to do the decent thing. I studied him then, not as the child I had raised, but as the man he had become. His face, once soft with laughter, was hardened now by greed. His eyes, once bright with curiosity, burned with nothing but hunger. How had my son, my beloved boy, transformed into this stranger who measured love in carats and respect in currency? I let his words wash over me, neither agreeing nor apologizing. To react would be to give him power. Instead, I sat quietly, my hands folded in my lap, my silence stronger than his shouting. It unnerved him. I saw it in the way his voice faltered, in the way he glanced at his wife for reinforcement. Silence, I realized, was my greatest weapon against his tantrums. Finally, they stormed out, slamming the door so hard the frame rattled. The house fell into silence once more. But this silence was not heavy with grief. It was filled with resolve. The whispers in the community continued to grow, but now they carried a different edge. People admired me not just for preserving the ring, but for standing firm against pressure. They saw in me a woman who valued legacy over greed, strength over surrender. Their praise was quiet, sometimes only in the way their eyes lingered with respect when I passed by, but it was enough. Michael's desperation, however, grew louder. Neighbors mentioned seeing him pacing outside the bank, overhearing snippets of his complaints. He was losing his grip on the narrative, and with every whisper of admiration for me, his sense of entitlement seemed to twist tighter, choking his pride. Yet his agitation did not frighten me anymore. Instead, it clarified my path. If my son could not see me as anything but a barrier, then I would remove myself from the battlefield entirely. He would never touch the ring, not while I drew breath, and not after. And so, as the whispers swirled around me, I began to plan my next step. If Michael wanted to claim the ring as his own, I would ensure it was placed somewhere beyond his reach forever, somewhere it could be admired, respected, and preserved, not clawed at by greedy hands. The thought settled in me like calm after a storm. The decision was not made in anger, but in love for my husband, for the generations before us, for the legacy that deserved honor, not theft. Michael's desperation might have been the spark, but my resolve was the flame, and it was only growing stronger. The idea came to me quietly, like a whisper in the stillness of night. It wasn't born of anger, though I had plenty of that simmering inside me. It wasn't born of spite, though my son's cruelty deserved it. No, the decision grew from something deeper, a need to honor, to protect, to ensure that the love woven into that ring would never again be cheapened by greed. For days, I weighed the choice in silence. The velvet box rested on my nightstand, catching the morning light like a silent guardian of memory. Each time I touched it, I thought of my husband. His voice seemed to echo in the stillness. Protect what matters, not just for them, for yourself, for us. And so, one morning, I dressed in my best coat and walked into the city. The box nestled securely in my bag. My destination was the grand stone building at the heart of town, the museum. Its steps were worn by decades of visitors, its tall windows reflecting the sky as though guarding centuries of stories within. Inside, I was greeted by the curator, a woman with thoughtful eyes and a demeanor that spoke of reverence for history. She listened as I told her the story, not the whole sordid tale with my son, but the history of the ring, how my husband had cherished it, how it had been passed down, how I now wished for it to live beyond me, beyond us all. When I opened the box and placed the ring upon the velvet cloth between us, the curator inhaled sharply. She leaned forward, her eyes wide, her gloved hands trembling slightly as she lifted it to the light. "This," she whispered, all softening her voice, "this is a treasure." "Yes," I said quietly, my heart both heavy and light. "But it is not meant to be hidden in a drawer or fought over at a kitchen table. It deserves to be seen, respected, and remembered. I would like to donate it in my husband's name." For a moment, she only stared at me, eyes shining with a respect that reminded me of the way my friends had spoken in the market. Then she nodded, her voice firm and reverent. "It would be our honor. We will display it with the recognition it deserves." Papers were signed, formalities completed. As I handed over the ring for the last time, a wave of emotions surged through me. Grief, yes, but also relief. I had carried its weight for decades, both literal and symbolic. Now, I was entrusting it to a place where no greedy hand could tarnish its meaning. Weeks later, the museum unveiled the display. I stood quietly among the crowd that gathered, my hands folded, my heart steady. The ring rested behind glass, illuminated under soft light, the filigree sparkling as if alive. Below it, a plaque read, "The Whitmore Heirloom Ring, donated in honor of Jonathan Whitmore, beloved husband and father, a legacy preserved for future generations." My eyes blurred with tears as I read his name, etched into permanence. My husband was not forgotten. His devotion, his sacrifice, his love now enshrined where all could see. People leaned close, admiring, whispering words of awe. They spoke not of greed, not of inheritance, but of history, beauty, and love. I felt taller in that moment, not diminished by what I had given, but strengthened by what I had secured. The ring was safe, the legacy was safe, and my son could never touch it again. News of the donation spread quickly, carried by the same whispers that had once celebrated the ring's appraisal. Neighbors congratulated me, praising the wisdom of my choice. "You've ensured it can never be lost to time," they said. "What a gift to the community." But while the community applauded, Michael C. I first heard of his fury through a mutual acquaintance, who mentioned in hushed tones that he had been seen storming out of the museum, his face red with rage. His wife, too, had been overheard complaining loudly in the cafe, lamenting that everything had been stolen from them. A part of me braced for the storm that was sure to come, but I did not regret what I had done. No storm could wash away the plaque now mounted, the ring now locked behind tempered glass, the legacy protected by steel and reverence. The confrontation came sooner than expected. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the air cooled, I heard the familiar roar of his car pulling into my driveway. The slam of the door, the heavy footsteps, the sharp knock at my door, it was all the prelude to the fury I knew awaited. But as I stood to open it, I felt no fear. My hands were steady, my heart calm, for I knew the truth. The ring was beyond his reach. His power over me, over it, had been broken. And now, whatever storm he brought into my home would be his fury alone, not my burden. The choice had been made. The legacy was preserved. The battle lines were clear. And as I turned the handle and faced my son, I was ready. The air in the house was heavy, as though it already knew what was about to unfold. The evening sun streamed in through the lace curtains, painting golden patterns across the floor. But its warmth did nothing to soften the tension that bristled in the room. Michael stood in the doorway, his face flushed, his jaw clenched, his fists balled at his sides. His wife lingered behind him, her eyes sharp, lips pressed into a thin, smug line. They looked like adversaries who had come not for conversation but for war. "Why?" The word exploded from him before I could even greet him. His voice thundered through the quiet house. "Why would you do this to me?" I stood still, my hands folded calmly in front of me, though my heart pounded. "Do what, Michael?" "You know exactly what," he roared, stepping into the room, pointing an accusing finger at me. "The ring. My ring. You gave it away, put it behind glass, like some trophy for strangers to gawk at. How dare you? It was mine by right. The words struck like knives, not because of their content. I had prepared myself for this, but because of the venom in his tone. There was no warmth in his voice, no trace of the boy who once held my hand as we crossed the street, who once climbed into my lap with his scraped knees. All I heard was entitlement, rage, greed. I drew in a breath, keeping my tone steady. It was never yours by right. It was your father's gift to me, entrusted to my care, and I chose to honor him by protecting it. Protecting it, he spat, his laugh bitter. From whom? From me, from your own son. Yes, I said, the word sharp and clear. His face darkened, and for a moment, I thought he might strike the air between us. You've betrayed me, mother, betrayed your own blood. It was my turn to let the anger rise, to allow years of swallowed pain to finally find a voice. No, Michael, I protected what mattered when you could not see past your own greed. Betrayal. I shook my head. You betrayed me long before this, with every dismissive word, every demand, every time you treated me not as your mother but as some gatekeeper to your inheritance. This ring was never about love to you, it was only ever about possession. His wife's heels clicked against the wooden floor as she stepped forward, her voice dripping with false sweetness. You're being cruel, mother. Michael only wanted what was his. A son deserves to inherit his family's treasures. Surely you know that. Surely you understand that when you hold on so tightly, you deny him his rightful place. I turned my gaze on her, and for the first time in years, I did not soften it. You mistake greed for love, child. You mistake entitlement for tradition. I see through you as clearly as I see through glass. You encouraged him, fed his arrogance, whispered in his ear until he no longer heard his own mother's voice. You do not care for the ring's history. You care only for its worth. Her lips tightened, her composure faltering, though she quickly tried to recover. That's unfair. I only wanted what's best for my family, best for your family. My voice rose now, strong, unshakable. A true wife teaches her husband humility, gratitude, respect. She builds, she nurtures, she honors. You have done none of that. You have stripped him of those values, and now he stands here, blinded by greed, screaming at his own mother. Michael slammed his fist against the table, the sound reverberating through the room. Don't you dare talk to her like that. Don't you dare pretend you're innocent in all this. You set me up to be humiliated. You made me look like a fool in front of this town. Do you know what people are saying? That I have no claim, that you outsmarted me. Me, your son. You should be ashamed. Ashamed. I stepped closer, my voice rising with decades of unspoken fury. Ashamed that I honored your father. Ashamed that I refused to hand over our history to your greed. No, Michael, the shame is yours. You paraded your entitlement for all to see. You reduced love to property, memory to currency. You humiliated yourself. For a moment, silence filled the room. His chest rose and fell rapidly, his face pale with anger. His wife shifted uncomfortably, realizing perhaps that the ground beneath her was crumbling. You don't understand, he muttered finally, his voice low, shaking with frustration. I deserved it. It was supposed to be mine. I looked at him then, not with rage, but with sorrow, the kind that settles deep in a mother's bones. You deserved my love, Michael. You deserved my trust, my guidance, my respect. And you had all of it once. But you threw it away when you decided that what mattered most was what you could take from me, not what you could share with me. His eyes flickered then, for just a moment, with something other than anger. A crack in the armor, pain, perhaps, or recognition. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by bitterness. You'll regret this, he hissed. When you're gone, and I have nothing, you'll regret what you've done. I will never regret standing up for myself, I said firmly. For too long, I bowed my head, hoping you would remember the boy you once were. But that boy is gone, replaced by a man who sees his mother as an obstacle instead of a blessing. I will not bow anymore. The words hung heavy between us, final and unyielding. His wife tugged at his arm, her voice sharp now, stripped of pretense. Let's go, Michael. She's made her choice. She's chosen herself over you. But I shook my head. No. I have chosen integrity over greed, love over entitlement, legacy over selfishness. If you cannot see that, then you are more lost than I feared. Michael's face twisted with fury, his mouth opening as though to unleash another torrent of rage. But then, he stopped, his eyes met mine, and for the first time, he seemed to realize that I would not bend, that no amount of shouting, demanding, or threatening would ever move me again. The realization stung him. I saw it in the way his shoulders slumped slightly, in the way his jaw trembled before he hardened it again. Without another word, he turned sharply, storming toward the door. His wife followed, muttering curses under her breath, her heels striking the floor like the punctuation of her disdain. The door slammed, rattling the walls, and suddenly the house was quiet again. I sank into the nearest chair, my body trembling from the force of it all, tears pricking at my eyes. But these were not the tears of defeat, they were the tears of release. For the first time in years, I had spoken my truth without fear, without hesitation. I had drawn a line, and I had not stepped back from it. The sorrow was there. Of course, how could it not be? To lose a son to greed is a grief deeper than words can capture, yet mingled with the sorrow was something else, something fierce, something liberating. I had reclaimed my voice, my authority, my place not as a gatekeeper to possessions but as the matriarch of this family, deserving of respect. Whether or not it was given, the house was still, the night settled around me, and though I knew the storm was far from over, I felt a calm within me I had not felt in years. Michael's fury was his burden to carry now, not mine. The days after Michael's storming departure unfolded in a hush I had not known in years. The silence of the house felt different now, not heavy with waiting or fear, but lightened, as though the walls themselves understood that I had finally taken back my voice. For the first time, I was not living under the shadow of my son's demands. Instead, I was free to think, to breathe, to reflect. At night, as I sat in my husband's old chair, I often found myself staring at the space on the mantel where the ring's velvet box once rested. It was gone now, secured behind the glass of the museum's display, but its absence did not wound me. If anything, it comforted me. That space was no longer a battleground. It was a reminder that some things are safest when they are beyond reach, and yet, I could not deny the ache in my chest. To clash with one's own child in such a way is no victory. There is no triumph in hearing your son's voice twisted with anger, no joy in watching him walk away. A mother never dreams of such endings. But life had shown me something harsher than dreams, that love without boundaries becomes enabling, and that silence in the face of disrespect only feeds entitlement. I thought often of my husband in those quiet moments. What would he have said if he had stood beside me through all this? I imagined him smiling gently, his hand warm over mine, telling me I had done right. He always believed in honor above comfort, in teaching lessons even when they carried pain. Perhaps this was his lesson too, carried through me. Perhaps the ring had never been about the gold, the gem, or the value at all. Perhaps it was always meant to test what we valued most, possession or principle. The community had not forgotten the ring's revelation, nor my decision to give it away. Friends visited with admiration in their eyes, praising me for my courage, for the foresight to preserve something that belonged not just to our family, but to history itself. Their words were kind, but it was not praise I sought. What mattered was the truth, that I had done what Michael could not. I had protected legacy from greed. And then came the letters, small notes, cards, even messages slipped into my mailbox from strangers who had seen the plaque in the museum. They thanked me for preserving a piece of heritage, for sharing it with the world rather than locking it away. One child had even drawn a picture of the ring, scribbled in crayons, with the words, "Thank you for letting us see this treasure." That drawing stayed pinned on my refrigerator, not because of the jewel it depicted, but because of the innocence it carried. Children do not see wealth in carats or dollars. They see beauty, wonder, and story. And that, I realized, was the inheritance I wanted to leave behind, not a trinket to fight over, but values to carry forward. My grandchildren had not yet come to me with questions, but I knew they would one day, and when they did, I would tell them the truth. Not just about the ring, but about the strength it took to protect it. I would tell them that family is not measured in what we own, but in how we honor one another. I would tell them that integrity is worth more than gold, and respect is worth more than inheritance. I had no illusions about Michael. His anger ran deep, and pride is a hard stone to crack. Perhaps he would never forgive me. Perhaps he would cling to the belief that I had wronged him. But that was his journey, not mine. A mother can guide, teach, and warn, but she cannot walk the path for her child. I had walked my own path, and I had chosen truth over appeasement. And with that choice came vindication, not the kind that comes from others' approval, but the quiet kind, the kind that settles deep into your bones when you know you have lived according to your values. I had chosen dignity over fear, integrity over silence, and in that choice, I found peace. Sometimes, I wondered if Michael would ever truly understand what he had lost. Not the ring that was never his to lose, but the inheritance of trust, of wisdom, of respect between mother and son. Those things cannot be appraised, cannot be locked in a safe or displayed in a museum. They are intangible, fragile, but priceless. And once broken, they are harder to restore than any jewel. But even if Michael never saw it, there were others who would. My grandchildren, yes, but also the neighbors. The children at the museum, the friends who came to sit with me in the evenings. They would see that inheritance is not about possessions. It is about what we stand for, what we teach, and what we leave behind in the hearts of those who come after us. The true inheritance, I realized, is not passed through rings or wills, but through values. It is in teaching courage by example, in showing kindness, even in conflict, in standing firm when it would be easier to yield. It is in love that sets boundaries, in truth that does not bend to greed. And so, though I had lost something in my son, I had gained something greater in myself. I had reclaimed the role of mother, not as servant to demands, but as guardian of values. I had proven that legacy is not something we hold in our hands, but something we carry in our hearts. In the evenings, when the house grew quiet and the last of the day's light faded, I felt my husband's presence more keenly than ever. Not in the ring, not in the museum's plaque, but in the peace that finally settled in my soul. He would have been proud, I knew, not because of the choice itself, but because I had found the strength to make it. That was my inheritance from him. The courage to stand firm, the wisdom to see beyond possessions, and the dignity to live by values, no matter the cost. And now, it was my turn to pass that inheritance forward. For one day, when my grandchildren looked back, they would not remember a jewel locked in a case. They would remember a grandmother who refused to be silenced, who chose truth over comfort, who showed them that love is not proven by what we give away, but by what we protect. That, I decided, was the true inheritance, priceless, enduring, unbreakable. And as I closed my eyes, letting the stillness of the night wrap around me, I felt something I had not felt in a long time. Not sorrow, not regret, but peace. The first time I stepped into the museum after the ring was installed, my knees nearly gave way beneath me. The great marble hall shimmered with polished light, its echo carrying the hum of visitors' footsteps and gentle whispers of awe. I had walked through this place many times before, but never had it felt so alive. Never had I felt such a pulse of belonging in its walls. There, at the center of the exhibit, encased in crystal clear glass, rested the ring, my husband's promise, my family's history, and now, the world's treasure. It gleamed under carefully arranged lighting, each facet of the jewel catching sparks of gold and fire. People clustered around it, young couples holding hands, children pressing their noses against the glass, elderly visitors studying the plaque with reverent attention. I stood at the edge of the crowd, my heart swelling and trembling all at once. The plaque read, "Donated in honor of Jonathan and Margaret Williams, whose devotion, sacrifice, and enduring legacy are preserved through this heirloom. May it remind us that love and integrity endure beyond possessions." I traced the words with my eyes, feeling tears blur the letters. My husband's name, my name, our storied end to permanence. This was what legacy should be, not locked in a drawer to fuel greed, but shining openly for all to see, for all to learn from. I watched a mother lift her daughter onto her hip, pointing to the inscription and whispering softly, "Do you see? They gave it so everyone could enjoy it, not just one person. Isn't that beautiful?" The little girl nodded solemnly, as if she understood. My heart clenched at the innocence of its children, grasping lessons that grown men like my son had cast aside. I did not move closer to the glass. I didn't need to. The ring no longer belonged in my hands. It belonged to time, to story, to history, and I had been the one to ensure it would never again be reduced to bargaining or bickering. That was my victory. As I turned, I noticed eyes upon me. A man, in a well-tailored suit, perhaps a visitor, perhaps a historian, nodded with recognition. A few women I knew from the community smiled softly in my direction. They had heard, they knew, not of the fight with Michael in its painful detail, but of the decision, the sacrifice, the strength it took. Their approval did not inflate. MIT steadied me. It told me I was not alone. The museum's curator approached, his voice gentle. "Mrs. Williams, I wanted to thank you again. The ring has already become one of our most visited exhibits. People linger here longer than anywhere else." I smiled faintly. "It's not the ring, really. It's the story." He nodded, his eyes thoughtful. "Yes, stories outlive jewels." As I walked through the other halls, I caught myself comparing the artifacts: ancient coins, swords, letters written by lovers separated by war. Each piece preserved more than just itself, but preserved a human truth. Mine was among them now, not because of its material worth, but because of what it stood for: a refusal to let love's memory be trampled by greed. Still, when I thought of Michael, the ache returned. I remembered the fury in his face, the venom in his words. My son, my own flesh and blood, unable to see beyond possession. That wound would not heal quickly, perhaps never fully, but in the stillness of the gallery, surrounded by centuries of endurance, I realized something vital. Victory does not mean erasing pain. It means carrying it with dignity, refusing to let it diminish you. The truth was, I had not lost him that day in the museum, or even in our argument. I had been losing him slowly, for years, to entitlement, to shallow desires, to the influence of a woman who measured love by what it could buy. But now, I had stopped the bleeding. I had drawn the line. And maybe, just maybe, time would teach him what I could not. Perhaps one day he would walk through this very hall, see the ring gleaming in its case, read the plaque with our names, and understand that his inheritance had never been gold or gems, but values, that his mother had not betrayed him but tried desperately, finally, painfully, to show him the truth. That was my hope, though I knew better than to cling to it. Hope, after all, is not control. What I could control, I had done. The rest was up to him. I left the museum with the evening sun spilling gold across the steps. The city was alive, children chasing each other in the square, vendors calling out their wares, couples laughing as they strolled. Life continued, vibrant and unapologetic. For the first time in years, I walked among it not as someone diminished, but as someone restored. At home, I poured myself tea and sat by the window. The silence was no longer empty. It was filled with echoes of legacy, with whispers of pride, with the quiet hum of peace. My husband's letters lay neatly bound on the table. I touched them lightly, smiling. "We did it," I whispered into the stillness. "We protected what mattered." In the weeks that followed, I noticed a shift in myself. The bitterness began to ebb, replaced not by forgetfulness, but by a sturdier kind of strength. I no longer looked at my life as a story of loss, but as a story of resilience. Michael's choices were his own. Mine had been to uphold the dignity of my family, and I had done so. Neighbors still spoke of the ring, of the honor of seeing our name in the museum. Grandchildren listened wide-eyed when I told them the tale not of Michael's anger, but of their grandfather's love and the meaning of legacy. Their small faces lit with awe as they imagined the jewel in its glass case, admired by strangers, safe forever. That was the inheritance I wanted for them, not the object, but the lesson. One evening, my eldest granddaughter sat beside me, her hand slipping into mine. "Grandma," she said, her voice quiet but sure, "when I grow up, I don't want jewelry. I want to be brave, like you." Tears filled my eyes, but this time they were not born of grief. They were born of victory, for in that simple statement, I saw the future redeemed. My true inheritance had taken root. The ring would shine in its glass case for generations, but the courage to say no, the strength to protect integrity that would shine far longer, carried in the hearts of those who followed me. Victory, I realized, was not defeating my son. It was reclaiming myself. It was proving that I could not be reduced to a gatekeeper of possessions, that I was more than the sum of what I gave away. It was showing that love is strongest when it refuses to bow to disrespect. That night, as the stars pricked the dark sky, I whispered one final prayer, not for wealth, not for reconciliation, not even for forgiveness, but for endurance, that the story of the ring, of Jonathan and Margaret Williams, would endure as a beacon not of riches, but of honor. And in that quiet prayer, I felt him with me again, my husband, my partner, my strength, his laughter in the wind, his hand in mine. Together, we had faced love, loss, betrayal, and finally triumph. Heritage restored, legacy preserved, dignity reclaimed. That was my final victory.